Well, let's dig deeper into what's happening at the NGX, and we have Oreoluwa Odetunde, research analyst at Ancoria Asset Management. Oreoluwa, it's good to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon.
Okay, Oreoluwa, we are seeing profit taking after 6 consecutive positive market sessions. Are we beginning to see some correction here?
Sorry?
Are we beginning to see correction in the markets after trading in for 6 consecutive positive market sessions now?
Necessarily say it's a correction yet. I would still say investors are just gradually taking profit of the market. And like you have rightly said, on a week-to-date basis, I mean, the market has remained very strong. On a year-to-date basis, it's up about 17%. We've seen sectors like the consumer goods sector outperform the other indicators, the other indexes. The sector is up by over 52% on a quarter-to-date basis, and on a month-to-date basis as well, it's up over 10%. So we've seen very strong growth in the index. But I mean, when we started to do some technical analysis on the market, we saw that the market is already in an overbought region. So, like you had rightly said, the profit-taking activities we are seeing is quite healthy. We still think that there is some upside, but there's still some upside potential in the market. We still expect to see some bullish activities, but like you said, I think it's healthy that we see some level of profit taking happening, but we don't actually think that this is a correction yet.
Okay, that's good for investors that are listening to this. But Oreoluwa, let's look at some of the stocks that have been driving this positive sentiment. MTN Nigeria has returned nearly 80% since the end of 2024. How much of that rally is driven by the recent 50% tariff hikes, and how much is due to stronger earnings and renewed investor confidence here?
Some part of the company's growth. I mean, its price increase, the 80% increase that you mentioned year to date, I think it's majorly been driven by fundamental changes that we've seen in the company's business model. You had rightly mentioned that we have had a tariff adjustment that had been done. Apart from that, we're also seeing a lot of data-driven demand in the company as well. In terms of the data subscribers, we are seeing that has grown by a cumulative average growth rate of around 50% in the last 5 years. So there's still very strong growth in its revenue. And in terms of this, from a cost perspective as well, we're seeing that the company was able to renegotiate some of its tower lease contracts. And we remember that its lease liabilities made up over 70% of total borrowings. Apart from that, we're also seeing some level of cost efficiency in terms of its infrastructure sharing agreement with Airtel Africa. So I think the company is trying to put a lot of things in place in order to reduce its FCY exposures and also achieve a level of operational efficiency. So I think it's majorly the rally we're seeing is majorly driven by a significant change in the company's business model. I mean, we still do expect to see a bit of positive sentiment. I think analysts forecast that the company's share price is expected to reach about 400 naira later this year. I mean, we're yet to see that play out, but I still expect to see some level of positive sentiment in the stock going forward. I think it's still largely dependent on its earnings, its Q2 and Q3 earnings as well.
Okay, Oreoluwa, you mentioned these operational models that you talked about. Is this a resurgence in this profit taking? You talked about the 400 naira mark we're looking at here, but is this sudden resurgence or recovery an indicator of investor confidence, or is this just a short-term pop in their share price and probably we'll see a pullback in MTN share price?
I don't think it's short-term. I don't think this is short-term. I think we're expected to see the company trade within these levels. I think since the start of the year, we've had a lot of analysts revise their forecast on the company's EPS or the company's margins as well. We still also expect to see some level of margin recovery, because if you see in 2023 and 2024, in terms of the operating margin of the firm, that fell to around 24-25% levels. But typically for MTN being a market leader in the telecommunications space, we usually would see his margins somewhere around 34-35% level. So we expect to also see some level of margin recovery, which we expect to continue to drive significant sentiment in the stock. I think one thing that the market might likely be pricing in was also the fact that the company might likely pay dividend this year, but we still see that might not be the case at the end of the day, because apart from the fact that revenue has been increasing quite significantly as well as profitability, we've seen that the company is also still increasing its capital intensity. There's a lot of capital expenditures also going into the firm. So should the company, if the company continues at this rate in terms of its capital expenditures, it will have a negative effect on the company's free cash flow and its ability to pay dividends.
Okay, so Aurelua, ₦1 million investment in MTN would now be worth about, say, 1.78 million naira. But what does this performance say about a broader sector momentum, and is this sustainable beyond the dividend payout expectations that we're talking about here?
Well, it is. I did mention that we're seeing, apart from, the gains that we're seeing is more broad-based. It's not just in the telecoms space. We've seen very strong growth in cyclical sectors like the industrial goods. We've seen some growth in the industrial goods sector, although the index is still down by about 7%. We still expect to see positivity along the lines, especially in the second half of the year. But for the consumer goods sector, we've seen very strong growth. It's a defensive sector, so we've seen very strong growth. And the sector was impacted by a lot of the FX devaluation and depreciation that we had in the last 2 years, as well as significant inflationary pressures. But it appears like we are achieving some level of macroeconomic stability in the economy. Inflation has been trending downwards. Exchange rate is a bit more stable, and all of that. So we're seeing a resurgence in terms of consumer spending. Recall that last year, in terms of consumer spending, when we looked at that component to total GDP, that component had actually shrunk to around 25%. It used to be around 60% levels, but it shrunk to 25%. But now that we're seeing all of these cost pressures are gradually dissipating, we are seeing a resurgence of consumer spending, which we think will be very positive, or would positively impact the corporate earnings of a lot of defensive sectors like the consumer goods sector, as well as the the industrial goods sector, which tends to be quite cyclical.
Okay, talking about consumer spending, I just want to chip in there, Aurelua, that we know that 50% tariff hike is still biting on consumer spending there. How much of disposable income do the investors or consumers have to spend more on data or airtime? And well, we do have to make calls regardless. But let's flip quickly to another sector, another stock, Oando. We see that Q1 strong start for the company. About seeing the stock beat a wane in investors' interest, profit taking, it gained 10% yesterday, but we're seeing profit taking in Oando today. Interest is beginning to wane, isn't it?
Yes, slightly. And you'd see that in terms of the de-escalation of the Middle East tensions, the way Oando has somewhat changed his business model. It's now majorly, its earnings is majorly driven by its upstream activities. So you'd see that, the earnings is majorly driven by the movement that we see in oil prices. And now that we saw the escalation of the war between Iran as well as Israel and the involvement in the US, we saw that oil prices started to make its way down, and so that negatively impacted the stock price of Oando.
Oh, definitely hope that's what's impacting it. Well, thank you so much, Aurelua Odetunde, research analyst and Courier Asset Management, for your thoughts and perspective on the show today.
Thank you for having me.